Previously on Covenant of the Ancient God of Destruction. Mike's careless life led to devastating consequences. After his heartbroken ex, Nneka, stole his powerful ancestral bead, his abandoned firstborn son grew up as the angry, forgotten Rogers in a Port Harcourt orphanage, while the Watchers, believing the prophecy was a myth, disbanded after Mike's new family proved normal. But deep inside Rogers, the ancient god Alaogbaga has been waiting, and now the time for vengeance is near. The story continues now. Subscribe so you don't miss the explosive new chapter.
For 19 long years, the being called Rogers had been trapped in a weak, growing body, trapped in a noisy home for unwanted children. But most of all, trapped by a burning, suffocating anger that never went away. Every single day was a painful wait. He watched the other children, so simple and human, with a deep and bitter hatred. He wasn't one of them. He was Alaogbaga, the ancient god of destruction. He was meant for power and blood, not for eating soft food and sleeping in a shared dormitory. He couldn't wait to be an adult, to finally break free from this prison and show the world his true, terrifying self. His mind often boiled with rage at the thought of his father, Mike. Why wasn't he there, he would think, his fists clenching. According to the ancient covenant with Chike, Mike should have been at his birthbed. He should have placed the sacred black bead around his neck, giving him his full power from the moment he drew his first breath. That was the plan. That was the promise. But nothing had gone right. His mother was dead. His father was nowhere to be found. And the bead, the source of his power and his connection to the spirit world, was lost. A cold fear sometimes cut through his anger. Where was the bead? If it was found and destroyed, he would be destroyed with it. This fear was the only thing that ever tempered his rage. This human world required more than just anger. It required thinking, planning, and patience, things that did not come naturally to him. In his true form, he was a force of pure destruction. He would accept blood sacrifices and unleash chaos when called upon. He wasn't a thinker. He was a destroyer. Now he was forced to be smart, and it was a constant, frustrating struggle. He was a strange and frightening sight. His body was completely hairless. No hair on his head. No eyebrows. No eyelashes. His skin was smooth and pale. He was small and thin, but underneath was a terrifying strength and speed that defied his size. His face was permanently set in a hard, mean scowl. He had never smiled, not once in 19 years. He was the most unpopular child in the orphanage. No one ever wanted to adopt him. The other children sensed he was different and stayed away. This was fine with him. He preferred to be alone, fighting the constant, hungry urge to snap their little necks and taste their blood. He remembered one time, when he was 12, a bigger boy had bothered him, pushing him and calling him names. A red-hot fury had taken over. Without even thinking, Rogers had grabbed the boy's arm and snapped it. The bone had broken with a sickening crunch, so easily, like a dry twig. For a moment, he had felt a flash of satisfaction, but it was quickly replaced by regret. The incident drew too much attention. The matron had punished him, and everyone looked at him with even more fear and suspicion. He couldn't afford that, not without his bead. He needed to be invisible until he was ready. So for 7 more years, he contained his bloodlust. He bottled up all his rage, his hatred for the name Rogers, his anger at his father, and his fear about the lost bead. He stored it all inside his heart, letting it grow and fester. He was a volcano waiting to erupt. Today his waiting was finally over. He was an adult, and the world was not ready for what was coming. But soon they would know. He is here, Alaogbaga, the ancient god of destruction.
The hallway at Imo State University was bustling with students rushing to their next classes. Tracy stood by her locker, trying to find her psychology textbook. She needed to get to the library. Her grades last semester had been disappointing, and she was determined to make her Aunt Emeka proud this time. Aunt Emeka was more than an aunt. She was the only mother Tracy had ever known. After her parents died, Emeka had taken her in, loved her, and sacrificed everything for her education. The disappointment in her aunt's eyes after her poor results had hurt more than any scolding. Tracy was not going to let that happen again. As she moved a stack of notebooks, something fell and rolled to the floor. It was a single black bead, smooth and dark, attached to a simple leather cord. Tracy picked it up, a faint memory stirring. She had found it years ago while looking through a box of her aunt's old things. When she had asked about it, Emeka's face had grown sad and distant. "It's nothing, Tracy," she had said softly. "Just a reminder of a man who broke my heart a long time ago. That's why I never married." Emeka had spoken about it with such finality that Tracy never brought it up again. But something about the bead fascinated her. It seemed to absorb the light, holding a deep, silent mystery. She had kept it, sometimes using it as a bookmark or just holding it when she needed to think. "What's that?" a voice said suddenly from behind her. Tracy jumped, nearly dropping the bead. She turned to see Eze, her ex-boyfriend, standing a little too close. Her heart sank. She had told him she needed a break to focus on her studies, but he hadn't taken it well. "You scared me, Eze," she said, putting the bead back into her locker. "You've been avoiding me," he said, his voice low and tense. "We need to talk." "Not now, Eze," Tracy replied, shutting her locker. "I have to study." "Study? Or is there someone else?" he pressed, his eyes narrowing. I sighed. "There's no one else. I just need space, like I told you. I need to focus on my future." Eze had always taken her for granted when they were together. Now that she was pulling away, he seemed to see her in a new light, more beautiful, more desirable, and he wasn't willing to let her go. "You can't just end things like that, Tracy," he said, his voice hardening. "We belong together." "No, we don't," she said firmly, clutching her books. "And I'm not discussing this here." She turned and walked away, heading towards the library. Eze didn't follow, but she could feel his eyes burning into her back. She knew he wasn't going to give up easily. As Tracy disappeared around the corner, Eze stood there, his hands clenched into fists. A dark thought crossed his mind. "She will come back to me," he vowed silently, "by choice or by force." Unaware of the danger brewing behind her or the power of the simple black bead in her locker, Tracy walked on, her mind filled with psychology theories, completely unprepared for the storm that was about to enter her life. The front door of Barrister Emeka's well-kept home in Owerri creaked open, and Ikenna slipped inside, trying to be quiet. It was no use. His father was sitting in the living room, reading a legal document, and looked up immediately. Emeka's eyes moved from his son's face down to his shirt, which was torn at the shoulder. A fresh bruise was forming on Ikenna's cheek. Emeka let out a long, weary sigh and put his papers down. "Ikenna," he said, his voice a mixture of disappointment and concern. "Again." Ikenna, a 21-year-old student at Imo State University, was handsome and well-built. He had his father's sharp eyes and his mother's strong jawline, a combination that made him the secret crush of many girls on campus. But his rugged, often bruised appearance and his reputation for getting into fights kept most of them at a safe distance. "It wasn't my fault, Dad," Ikenna said, his voice firm. He walked further into the room, not trying to hide his torn clothes. "Tell me," Emeka said, gesturing for his son to sit. "Whose fault was it this time?" "I was at the motor park, getting airtime," Ikenna began, his eyes flashing with the memory. "I saw 3 big guys surrounding this small boy, a first-year student, I think. He looked terrified. They were demanding his phone, pushing him around." Emeka listened, his lawyer's mind already constructing the scene. "And you decided to be the judge, jury, and executioner?" Emeka asked, though there was no real anger in his voice, only a deep, familiar fatigue. "What was I supposed to do, Dad? Watch?" Ikenna's voice rose with passion. "They were oppressing him. He didn't do anything wrong. So yes, I stepped in. I told them to leave him alone. One of them swung at me, and it escalated." Ikenna stood there, unapologetic. He was proud of the bruises, proud of the torn shirt. To him, they were badges of honor, proof that he had stood for what was right. He couldn't stand by and watch the strong prey on the weak. It was a fire in his blood that he couldn't put out. Emeka looked at his son, this brave, reckless, frustrating young man. For years, his biggest worry had been an ancient prophecy about a god of destruction. He had disbanded the Watchers, convinced it was a fairy tale. Now, his greatest fear was that his own son's fierce sense of justice would get him seriously hurt or killed. In that moment, a street fight seemed like a much smaller, more manageable problem than the end of the world. "I understand why you did it, son," Emeka said, his voice softening. "But you can't solve every problem with your fists. You're studying to be an engineer, not a vigilante. What if they had a knife next time? What if there are more of them?" "I can handle myself," Ikenna replied, his jaw set stubbornly. "I couldn't live with myself if I just walked away." Emeka shook his head, a sad smile on his face. He was fighting for justice in courtrooms with words and laws, while his son fought it in the streets with his fists and courage. They were 2 sides of the same coin, but Ikenna's method was far more dangerous. "Just be careful, Ikenna," Emeka said finally, his worry evident. "The world needs more young men with good hearts, but I need my son." Ikenna nodded, but the look in his eyes showed he was already thinking about the next injustice, the next fight. He was a protector, and nothing his father said would change that.
Rogers stood outside the matron's office, his entire body humming with a lifetime of suppressed fury. 19 years of being called a name he despised. 19 years of being treated like a worthless orphan. 19 years of waiting. It all ended today. He needed his file. It held the only clues to his past, to the woman who had brought him here, and perhaps to the location of his bead. He didn't bother to knock. He simply threw the door open, the knob smashing against the wall with a loud crack. The matron, a stern woman in her 50s, looked up from her desk, her eyes wide with shock. Her young secretary, who was arranging files on a shelf, let out a small gasp and dropped a folder. For a moment, no one moved. The matron's mind flashed back to the 12-year-old boy who had snapped a bone like a twig, and to the terrifying moment later that day when he had silently opened her door just to stare at her. The fear from that day came rushing back, colder and sharper. "You—" the matron started, but her voice failed her. Rogers didn't speak. He moved with a speed that was unnatural, a blur of pale skin and focused rage. He ignored the matron for a second and went straight for the secretary. Before the young woman could even raise her hands in defense, Rogers grabbed her by the arm and violently shoved her across the room. Her head struck the wall with a sickening thud, and she slid to the floor, dazed and moaning in pain. He then turned to the matron. In 2 quick strides, he was at her desk. He didn't hit her. Instead, he leaned over, his hairless face inches from hers, his dark eyes burning with pure hate. The smell of his anger filled the room. "My file," he snarled, his voice low and guttural. "Where is it?" The matron, trembling uncontrollably, could only point a shaking finger toward the metal filing cabinet. There, the R section," she stammered. "Get it," he commanded. Still dizzy, the secretary crawled to her knees and with fumbling hands found the file labeled Rogers. She handed it to him, her eyes wide with terror. Rogers took the thin folder. This was it, the story of his pathetic human beginning. He opened it, his eyes scanning the few pages. He saw the name of the woman who brought him in, Nkechi. He saw the word deceased next to mother, Rita. He saw the official stamp of the orphanage. It was all so meaningless, so small. Then he looked back at the matron, the woman who had given him the name he loathed, the woman who represented every moment of his powerlessness. A calm, cold purpose settled over him. He picked up a cheap ballpoint pen from her desk. The matron saw the decision in his eyes. "No, please," she begged. The plea was cut short as Rogers drove the pen into her neck. She made a choked, gurgling sound. He didn't stop. He stabbed her again in the shoulder, then in the arm. Not a frenzied attack, but a deliberate, brutal punishment. Blood, dark and red, began to spill across her white uniform and the paperwork on her desk. He watched the blood flow for a moment, a deep, ancient hunger stirring within him. He leaned forward and licked the warm, metallic-tasting blood from the wound on her neck. A twisted sense of power, his first real taste of it in this world, flooded through him. He looked down at the dying woman. "My name is not Rogers. I am Alaogbaga, the ancient god of destruction," he declared, his voice now strong and resonant, filling the room with an unnatural chill. He dropped the bloodied pen on her desk. He didn't even glance at the crying secretary as he turned and walked out of the office, the file clutched in his hand. His hands and clothes were stained with blood, but he didn't care. He walked straight through the main hall and out the front gates. Children and staff members saw him, but the look on his face and the blood on his hands were more effective than any lock. They froze, too terrified to make a sound or try to stop him. Rogers was finally free, and his destruction of the world had just begun with a simple pen.
The evening news provided a soft hum in Barrister Emeka's living room, a backdrop to a rare moment of quiet. Ikenna was sprawled on the sofa, his attention divided between a textbook and his phone. Emeka sat in his armchair, the day's legal briefs forgotten on his lap. This was the peace he had fought for, a life free from the shadow of ancient prophecies. And in a disturbing report from Port Harcourt, the news anchor's voice shifted, cutting through the domestic calm. A violent escape from the Mother of Mercy orphanage has left authorities searching for answers. Ikenna looked up, his interest caught by the word violent. Emeka sighed, a paternal sadness settling over him. The world was so full of needless pain. The screen showed a reporter outside a nondescript building. The assailant, a 19-year-old inmate known only as Rogers, allegedly attacked the matron in her office before fleeing. Sources described the attack as exceptionally brutal. "Animals," Ikenna muttered, his sense of justice flaring. "Attacking someone who cares for orphans." Emeka nodded in grim agreement. But then the reporter delivered the line that would shatter his reality. "A witness at the scene claims the young man made a bizarre statement before his escape." The reporter paused for effect. "He was heard saying, 'My name is not Rogers. I am Alaogbaga, the ancient god of destruction.'" The name, Alaogbaga, did not just enter the room, it detonated. For a single suspended second, Emeka's mind refused to process it. It was an impossibility, a word from a forbidden lexicon suddenly spoken on national television. Then the dam broke. The comfortable living room vanished. In its place, he saw the dark, smoky interior of the watcher's hut. He felt the weight of the elder stairs, heard the rustle of ancient pages, and felt the chilling dread that had been his constant companion for years. The prophecy was not a story. It was a warning, and that warning had a name. A cold tremor started in his hands and radiated through his entire body. His heart seized, then began to pound a frantic, painful rhythm against his ribs. The air grew thin, and he had to consciously remember to breathe. This is not happening. This is a nightmare, a coincidence. But his trained, logical mind, the mind of a lawyer, began its work, cutting through the panic. Coincidence? The statistical probability of a random, violent orphan selecting that exact, obscure, and culturally specific name was 0. It wasn't a name from comic books or popular culture. It was a name from a secret history, a name meant to be forgotten. His thoughts became a rapid, analytical firestorm. We were wrong. We were so catastrophically wrong. He mentally reviewed their strategy. They had focused entirely on Mike, the 10th-generation heir. They watched for him to marry, to have a child. They saw his normal children and concluded the prophecy was a myth. But could they have been observing the wrong lineage? The prophecy stated the god would be born through the bloodline. It never specified it would be born to the heir we were watching in his planned public family. A new, horrifying variable entered his calculation. But why was Mike in possession of the bead of covenant? What exactly happened to the bead? 19 years ago was exactly the same time Mike got married and the watches were disbanded. Who was this young man in an orphanage in faraway Port Harcourt claiming to be Alaogbaga? What could they have missed? 19 years ago was also the exact time Mike lost the bead. The pieces clicked into place with terrifying clarity. The lost bead. Its disappearance had not been an accident, it was a symptom. The covenant was breaking because the destined vessel had been born into chaos, without the bead, without his protector. The god wasn't missing, he had been growing up in an orphanage, festering in rage. And now, he was loose. Ikenna was staring at him. "Dad, your face, you're white as a ghost. What's wrong?" Ikenna couldn't answer. He was a fortress whose walls had just crumbled. The careful life he had built, the rational world of law and order he inhabited, was an illusion. The ancient supernatural war he thought he had left behind was not only real, it had just declared itself. He looked at his son, this brave, reckless boy who fought street bullies, and a fresh, more intimate terror gripped him. What world was he leaving for Ikenna? The news segment ended, moving on to sports. But for Emeka, the world had stopped. He was paralyzed, his mind screaming with the single unanswerable question that echoed in the void where his certainty had once been. The god is here. The watchers are gone. I am alone. What in God's name do I do now?
The game has changed forever. Alaogbaga walks free, hunting for his past and his power, while the sacred bead rests in the hands of an unknowing Tracy, and a newly alerted Emeka remains paralyzed by doubt. Now, as destiny tightens its grip, the burning questions remain. Will Emeka overcome his fear and reassemble the Watchers before it's too late? And can anyone stop Rogers from finding Tracy and claiming the bead that will unleash his full wrath upon the world? The stakes have never been higher, and every moment counts. Subscribe and hit the bell now so you don't miss the next explosive chapter as these converging paths ignite.